All right, so you can see on my screen, I've opened a caseware file for you, and I'm going to start by simply just working through some of the documents. In pre-engagement planning, the first part where we come across these words, relevant controls, is in 1051, types and volumes of transactions. Now, in opening this document, many of you would already have seen this. I just want to give some time until everybody is seeing the screen. Right, it looks like you're seeing the screen. Okay, so what you find here is that you always have your descriptions, transactions, etc., and you fill these out, and then at the bottom is where the problem comes, because now you've got this question that says, are controls in this section relevant to the audit? And you have to answer this for every one of these sections that's got an account balance. So that might get a little bit, much. What is this about? Now, before we start going into the document any further at all, I first want to start just saying, where's this coming from? I suppose you can guess already, it's from the auditing standards. But what is this exactly? There are basically three instances where you have to go and look at controls. I'm not saying test, but look at the controls. First of all, whenever there are control activities that mitigate a significant risk. So that's, of course, only later in a process where you would have seen you show with 1160, you show the risk or record the risk when you are in risk record mode. You record the risk, and as soon as you say, yes, it's a significant risk, you would have had that part that popped up and said, are there any controls mitigating this risk, yes or no? So that's a separate part. So that's not really relevant in this section. Then secondly, whenever there are risks in your client that is so, I wouldn't say funny, but so of such a nature that you can't only vouch. So you can't only tick and bash. You can't only do substantive procedures. You have to do something more. Now, the only way that you can really get sufficient and appropriate audit evidence is either through substantive procedures, be it analytical, substantive, or ticking and bashing, the detailed testing, or then, of course, the only other option is control testing. So if you have to go and do control testing, you have to go and consider the controls. Now, you could then go and use this section to already go and start having a look at those accounts and the, let's call it, the system descriptions and the controls and things like that. But the third part is really what's driven this question in the software. And that is where it says that the control activities are also relevant to the audit, should also be considered when the auditor judges the controls to be relevant or considers the controls to be relevant. Now, that's obviously quite nice, but now what now? How do I go about this? When would I decide that the control is going to be relevant to my audit? And here's some practical things, really. You will see after we've worked through the second part that many of these things may even seem in hindsight quite obvious. First of all, I always ask myself, do I think it's necessary for me to have a system description in the file, in the audit file, for sales, for fixed assets, for debtors, for bank, for any of these sections? Do I think it's necessary to have a system description? If the answer is yes, then you will have to say yes at this question. Are controls relevant to the section? And then yes, so that we can have the part where I can put my system description. The other two, however, are the important parts. Firstly, are there any controls relating to a specific assertion that I may want to go and test? So let's say we're looking at revenue at the moment. There is maybe a control that I know about from previous years that I know is nice to test, because if I can test that, I can place some reliance on it, and the next moment then I can obviously do some less work. I don't have to draw quite as big a sample, anything like that. Okay, so that's the second part. Firstly, do I want the system description? Secondly, are there any controls that relate to a specific assertion, financial statement assertion, that I may want to go and test? Right, and then that's actually very, very similar to what the standard as well also says, is that the moment that you think it may be appropriate to test the controls, then you want to go and do that. Of course, the third part or the last part also is, of course, if you want to go and give your client feedback as to whether there are controls in place or not. Very often we like to think of those as value add. Of course, now we have to go and do that. So then go and look at the system and say, hang on, client, here are some things that you can improve on. This would be the section that I'm going to say, yes, I'm going to do it. So for revenue, you can see in the working paper, I've already gone through the menu and said, yes, I want to select those. Okay. When I look at fixed assets, for instance, that's now another section. There I specifically gone and said no. You can see there that I said no. Now, why would I have said no to this case? Let's just say it's a relatively small audit, and I've also gone and applied the sections in the auditing standard that then relates to smaller entities. Now, this is maybe some good news to you, because what I've just said is all fine, but where's the limit? Now, the auditing standard then specifically also goes and says, okay, fine, small entities is not as formal, firstly. The controls are not as formal. It's often one, maybe two people that's doing it, and that's also part of the definition of choosing whether it's a small entity audit or not. Okay, so that's the second part that I then say, okay, fine, maybe in this client there aren't those formal controls, or the segregation of duties is very limited or just simply non-existent. So in those cases then the standard says that's all fine and well, but remember there may still be controls that you may want to rely on, so that's the first part. But then lastly it comes to the conclusion of saying in smaller entities you are probably always going to find controls for revenue, purchases, and basically payroll as a minimum. And I would like to believe that in most cases you're at least going to do controls, consider controls for those three sections. So that's also why for property, plant and equipment in this case I've said no. If you feel that's important to you, by all means go and have a look at that, and that's all fine. You can, as a matter of fact, look at controls, consider them to be relevant for every one of the account balances if you want. Okay, but for our purposes today then I've selected no for all the other items except in income statement. I've selected yes for revenue, and also just to have another section also for employee costs, or then salaries, payroll. Okay, I just want to hang on a moment so that you can see the screen as well. Right, so there you can see then for payroll I've also selected yes. Okay, the other little bit of a confusion or difficult part that we often get is the one relating to related parties. We're still in types and volumes of transactions. In the other tab we've got all those items relating to financial statement preparation, etc. And then with the related parties you suddenly think, hang on, here's a problem. You suddenly think this is a problem because now you don't have the option to say yes, no, or nothing. You only have a yes and nothing else. Okay, why is this the case? Well, the auditing standard on related parties, you will see this little bit of blue there on the just below the question, says then that you must always consider controls for related party transactions. Okay. Now, what are those controls? Those controls are around identifying the related parties, around identifying related party transactions, keeping the information separate so that you will know, you being the client, will know that this is now the kind of controls that I would probably have to go and test, and you would know that these are the kind of things that the client actually does to see to it that the financial statements are actually correct at the end of the day, relating to related party transaction disclosures. Okay, so for related parties, you will only be able to select a yes here. All right. I don't see any questions coming in. If at any point in time you guys have a question relating to what I'm saying at the moment, or even to something else, you're welcome to start typing your questions, especially as I'm going through the documents if you want me to just expand on something. Right, so that's the types and volumes of transactions, 1051. Where does this go from here? Well, it basically goes then to the part where we're going to go and look at controls design and implementation. So if I now close this working paper and I go to 1150, that is then the next part that we're going to be looking at.